In 1971, a 17-year-old girl fell 2 miles from the sky into the Amazon rainforest and survived. She wasn't a survivalist. She wasn't a soldier or an athlete. She was a high school student flying home for Christmas with her mother, strapped into seat 19F when the plane tore apart in a thunderstorm at 10,000 feet. 91 people were on that flight. 90 died, some on impact, some in the days that followed, injured and waiting for rescue that never came. Juliane Koepcke hit the jungle canopy still buckled to her seat. She woke up alone on the forest floor with a broken collarbone, a gash on her arm, and one eye swollen shut. Her mother was gone. The plane was scattered across miles of trees. What happened next took 11 days. This is not a story about luck. This is a story about what a girl knew, and how knowing it kept her alive when everything else failed. Juliane Koepcke. The name appears in aviation records, survival textbooks, and German newspapers from the winter of 1971. She became famous for falling. But she survived because of what came before. Her full name was Juliane Margaret Koepcke. Born in Lima, Peru on October 10, 1954, to 2 German zoologists who had moved to South America to study the rainforest. Her childhood was unusual by any standard. What we know. She spent her teenage years at Panguana, a remote research station her parents built in the Peruvian Amazon. She learned to identify venomous snakes by age 10. She knew which insects to fear and which to ignore. She understood that moving water meant direction, and direction meant civilization. What she knew with devastating clarity on December 24, 1971. She was injured, alone, and somewhere in a jungle that could kill her faster than her wounds. To understand what Juliane faced, you have to understand where she fell. The Peruvian Amazon covers an area larger than California. The section where Lanza Flight 508 went down sits roughly 300 miles northeast of Lima, in a region where the Andes foothills dissolve into lowland rainforest. The canopy there rises 150 feet. Trees block sunlight so completely that the forest floor exists in permanent twilight. Humidity hovers near 100% year-round. Temperatures stay between 75 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit, day and night, with little variation. Rainfall averages 120 inches per year. During the wet season, which December falls squarely within, storms arrive daily. The rivers swell. The ground becomes saturated. Walking becomes wading. No roads, no trails, no clearings large enough to spot from the air. The threats stack up fast. Venomous snakes include the fer-de-lance, whose bite causes tissue to die within hours, and the bushmaster, which can exceed 10 feet in length. Bullet ants deliver stings rated among the most painful of any insect. Entomologist Justin Schmidt, who developed the Schmidt Pain Index, described the sensation as pure, intense, brilliant pain. Rivers hide caimans, piranhas, and parasites that burrow under skin. Kangaroo catfish, according to accounts from regional hospitals, have been known to lodge in human tissue. Even the plants fight back. Some trees secrete compounds that blister on contact. Others drop fruit heavy enough to cause concussion. Yet the Amazon also provides. Rivers hold arapaima, one of the largest freshwater fish on Earth, along with dozens of edible species. Fruit grows wild on palms and vines. Rainwater collects in bromeliad leaves, clean enough to drink. Indigenous peoples have lived in this region for at least 11,000 years. According to archaeological evidence from the University of Exeter, the Ashaninka, Yain, and Shipibo-Kanibo peoples built complex societies here, navigating waterways and harvesting what the forest offered with techniques passed down through hundreds of generations. The jungle doesn't kill indiscriminately. Kills those who don't know its rules. Juliane knew some of the rules. Her parents had spent 14 years teaching her. On December 24, 1971, Lanza Flight 508 departed Lima's Jorge Chávez International Airport at 11 a.m., bound for Pucallpa. The flight should have taken 1 hour. 91 passengers and crew settled in for what most expected to be routine. Christmas Eve. Families heading home. Students returning from school in Lima. Juliane sat in row 19 with her mother, Maria. They had booked the flight reluctantly. LANSA had a poor safety record. 2 of its planes had crashed in the previous 4 years. But other airlines were sold out, and Maria needed to return to Panguana to care for the research station. 25 minutes into the flight, the plane entered a thunderstorm. According to crash investigators, cited in a 1972 report by the Peruvian Ministry of Transport, the pilot attempted to navigate through rather than around the storm system. Turbulence intensified. Passengers later described lightning flashing so close it lit the cabin blue. Then came the sound. Juliane would later recall it as a roaring, like an engine failing, followed by screaming. The plane had been struck by lightning. The fuel tank in the right wing ignited. The aircraft broke apart at cruising altitude. She felt herself falling, still strapped to her seat. Row 19. 3 seats connected, spinning through the darkness. Her last memory before losing consciousness was green. The jungle canopy rushing up. She did not remember impact. Juliane woke the next morning on the forest floor. She was still strapped to her seat, but the other 2 seats in her row were gone. Her mother was gone. The world was green and wet and silent except for insects. The damage was severe but survivable. Her right collarbone was broken. A deep gash ran along her upper arm. Her left eye had swollen shut from impact. She had lost her glasses and 1 shoe. She was wearing a sleeveless mini dress. Nothing else. Her first instinct was to search for her mother. She walked in circles for hours, calling out, hearing nothing. Wreckage dotted the forest. Seats, luggage, Christmas presents still wrapped. But no survivors. No response. By afternoon, the shock began to fade. She assessed her situation. No food, no tools, no way to signal, no idea where she was. But she remembered something her father had told her. If you're ever lost in the jungle, find water. Follow it downstream. Water leads to bigger water. Bigger water leads to people. She started walking. Let me explain how she navigated without a compass, map, or clear sightlines. The Amazon floor is not flat. It slopes almost imperceptibly toward drainage channels. Juliane had learned to read this grade from years at Panguana. She walked downhill, always downhill, scanning for the glint of water or the sound of a stream. On the second day, she found a creek. The water was muddy, warm, and no more than knee-deep. She began following it downstream. Her father had explained the hydrology. Small streams feed larger streams. Larger streams feed rivers. Rivers in the Amazon basin eventually lead to settlements. People build villages near water. Fishermen work the banks. Loggers float timber. If you follow water long enough, you find humanity. The pace was agonizing. The creek bed was choked with roots and fallen branches. Each step required lifting legs through sucking mud that reached her thighs in places. The broken collarbone made arm movement excruciating. Pushing branches aside, catching herself when she slipped, every motion sent pain through her shoulder. Her bare left foot collected cuts that would soon attract flies. The sole had softened in the constant water. Rocks and submerged roots tore the skin. She tied her remaining shoe around her neck and walked barefoot on both sides to even the damage. But she kept moving. Modern survival experts, including those interviewed for a 2009 Werner Herzog documentary about Juliane's ordeal, estimate her pace at roughly 1 mile per day through that terrain. 11 days of walking covered perhaps 8 to 12 miles total. The jungle's density turned what would be an afternoon hike on open ground into a marathon of endurance. She ate almost nothing. A few berries she recognized as safe. Some fruit that had fallen into the stream. The calories were minimal. By day 4, hunger had faded into a dull background ache, replaced by thirst and exhaustion. Water kept her alive in more ways than one. She drank from the stream despite the parasites she knew it contained. Giardia, amoebas, waterborne bacteria. She would deal with those later. Dehydration would kill her faster. She used the current to cool her infected wounds, letting the flow wash dirt from the gash on her arm. And she trusted the water to lead somewhere. By day 4, the creek joined a larger stream. By day 7, the stream joined a river. The body can endure what the mind cannot. What Juliane experienced in those 11 days went beyond physical hardship. She was alone, completely alone. No voice but her own. No evidence that anyone in the world knew where she was or whether she was alive. Isolation does specific things to the human brain. According to research published in the journal Neuroscience Biobehavioral Reviews, prolonged solitude triggers anxiety, depression, and cognitive distortion. Time perception warps. Minutes feel like hours. Hours vanish without memory. Hallucinations can begin within days for some individuals. The Amazon amplified these effects. The constant noise of insects and birds created a wall of sound that paradoxically made the silence of human absence more oppressive. At night, that wall shifted. Different species, different rhythms. The darkness became absolute. No moon penetrated the canopy. Juliane later described talking to herself constantly, not as a sign of breakdown but as a deliberate strategy. Speaking aloud anchored her to reality. It gave structure to the silence. She narrated her actions. I am going to climb over this log. I am going to rest here. I am going to keep walking. The words became proof she still existed. She also kept routines. Walk during daylight. Rest at dusk. Find a spot above the waterline to sleep, ideally on roots or vegetation that kept her away from the ground where snakes traveled. Wake at first light and repeat. These patterns, according to survival psychologist John Leach, function as cognitive scaffolding. They prevent the mind from spiraling into what Leach calls cognitive paralysis, the shutdown that kills people who have every physical capacity to survive but simply stop acting. Juliane had never read survival psychology, but she applied its principles by instinct or perhaps by training. Her parents had modeled routine in the jungle for years. The nights were hardest. Without shelter, she lay on the riverbank listening to sounds she couldn't identify. Every rustle could be a snake. Every splash could be a caiman. Sleep came in fragments, 20 minutes at a time, interrupted by fear and cold and the gnawing ache of her wounds. But morning always came, and she kept walking. On day 5 or 6, sources conflict on the exact timeline, she found wreckage. A row of seats, still bolted together, lay in a shallow stream. 3 bodies were strapped in, driven headfirst into the mud. The impact had been vertical, fatal. Juliane recognized none of them, but she understood what she was seeing. Other passengers had survived the initial fall, only to land in positions that killed them. She searched the wreckage for supplies, found nothing useful, kept walking. Historians still debate whether other survivors lived for hours or days after the crash. Some accounts suggest voices were heard in the jungle on December 25th and 26th. Peruvian search teams found evidence that at least 14 people survived the fall itself. None were rescued in time. The official search lasted 10 days. Planes flew over the crash zone but saw only canopy. The wreckage was invisible from above. Meanwhile, Juliane walked. By day 9, her arm had developed maggots. The flies that had swarmed her wounds on the second day had laid eggs. Botfly larvae, common in the Amazon, burrow into living tissue to feed and grow. The sensation is distinctive. Movement beneath the skin. A crawling that won't stop. She could feel them moving. Could see the flesh around her gash rippling. This sounds like the end. It wasn't. Juliane remembered something else from her father's lessons. Her family's dog at Panguana had once been infested with similar larvae. Her father had explained the biology. Maggots eat dead tissue. They can actually clean a wound by removing infected material that would otherwise spread rot. The pain was severe, but the infection stopped spreading. She left them alone. Modern medicine confirms this. Maggot debridement therapy is used in hospitals worldwide to treat wounds that don't respond to antibiotics. The FDA approved medicinal maggots in 2004. Surgeons apply them to diabetic ulcers, burn injuries, and post-surgical infections. The larvae secrete enzymes that dissolve necrotic tissue while leaving healthy cells intact. Juliane didn't know the science. She knew the jungle, and she trusted what her father had shown her. By day 10, the river had widened. She began seeing signs of human activity. A cleared bank where vegetation had been cut back. Path worn into the mud. Something that looked like a boat motor abandoned in the shallows, rusted but recognizable. She followed the path and found a hut. Empty. But inside, a barrel of gasoline, some tools, and a small outboard motor covered in plastic. Someone would return. Loggers, probably, or fishermen using this as a base camp. She considered waiting, but her wounds needed more than waiting could provide. The maggots were still growing. The infection, though contained, was spreading again. She poured gasoline on her arm. The pain was blinding. Gasoline is a solvent. It burns exposed tissue, but it also kills larvae, suffocating them in their burrows. One by one, she pulled the maggots out with her fingers. Some had burrowed deep. She had to dig. 35 of them. She counted. Then she collapsed onto the floor of the hut and slept for the first time in days without waking. The next morning, January 3, 1972, voices woke her. 3 lumbermen had arrived at their camp to find a teenage girl, barefoot, covered in insect bites, with a gaping wound in her arm and one eye swollen shut. Her dress was torn. Her skin was mottled with bruises and infected cuts. She had lost perhaps 15 pounds from a frame that was already slender. According to accounts published in Der Spiegel in January 1972, the men initially thought she was a water spirit, a Yakuruna from indigenous Amazonian legend. These spirits were said to lure travelers into the river. She looked barely human. She spoke to them in Spanish, explained who she was, what had happened, the plane crash, her mother, the 11 days of walking. They didn't believe her at first. No one survives a plane crash at 10,000 feet. No one walks out of the jungle alone. They had heard nothing about any crash. The news hadn't reached this remote camp, but they fed her, gave her water, cleaned her wounds with the same gasoline she had used, then dressed them with rags. And the next morning, they took her by canoe 7 hours downstream to the town of Turnavista. From there, a missionary pilot flew her in a small Cessna to a hospital in Pucallpa. She had been missing for 11 days. 90 people had died in a crash that rescuers had essentially given up on finding. And a 17-year-old girl with a broken collarbone, a maggot-infested wound, and no supplies had walked out of the jungle using knowledge her parents had given her. The story made international headlines within hours. The sole survivor, the miracle girl, the girl who fell from the sky. Juliane's rescue made international headlines. The sole survivor, the miracle girl. But the aftermath was not simple. Her mother's body was found 19 days after the crash, roughly 2 miles from where Juliane had landed. Juliane Koepcke had survived the fall. Evidence suggested she lived for several days, injured and alone, before dying. Juliane had walked within 100 yards of her mother without knowing it. That detail appears in multiple accounts, including Juliane's own memoir published in 2011. She has said it took decades to process. The jungle is dense. Sound doesn't travel. She could not have known. Her father, Hans Wilhelm Koepcke, continued his research at Panguana until his death in 2000. Juliane eventually followed her parents' path, earning a doctorate in zoology and becoming a librarian at the Bavarian State Collection of Zoology in Munich. She returned to the crash site twice. Once in 1998 with Werner Herzog, who filmed her walking the same route she had taken alone 27 years earlier. The jungle had reclaimed most of the wreckage, but the path the water cut remained. She is still alive as of 2024, now in her late 60s, still giving occasional interviews, still telling a story she never wanted to live. This story endures because it asks uncomfortable questions. Why did she survive and not her mother? Not the other 13 who likely lived through the fall? The variables are too numerous to assign meaning. Angle of descent, position in the canopy, pure chance. We can't know for sure why Juliane's seat spun in a way that let the jungle break her fall instead of her body. Physics offers partial explanations. The seat's rotation may have created drag. The canopy may have absorbed just enough energy. But partial explanations are not answers. What we do know is what she did after landing. That part wasn't luck. It was knowledge applied under pressure without hope of rescue. Of the roughly 200 documented cases of soul survivors from commercial aviation disasters, according to data compiled by the Aviation Safety Network, very few involve survival in wilderness conditions afterward. Most soul survivors land near rescue. Juliane landed in one of the most hostile environments on Earth and walked out. Her training was informal. Childhood lessons from scientist parents. Attention paid. Details remembered. She did not choose to fall. She chose to move. That choice, made every morning for 11 mornings without witnesses or guarantees, is what this story leaves us with. Not a miracle, a decision, repeated until it worked. If stories like this change how you think about survival, consider supporting the channel. Like the video, subscribe, and join us for more true accounts of ordinary people facing the impossible and deciding, step by step, to live.